Hi everyone, I'm Patricia Leavy, and we're here today to talk about my book, Reinvention Methods of Social Fiction. And Sandra is going to lead the discussion, but obviously we're very happy to have participation in any way that people want to participate in the chat or just shouting out or whatever you want to do. And I think we're going to start with just sort of a basic of what the book is about for people who haven't read it yet, but I'm going to hand it over to Sandra so she can lead that discussion.
Okay. I feel like I should introduce you though, Patricia.
Go for
it. Yeah, we are here to talk about this most amazing book. And so I'm just going to give some highlights for those of you who don't know Patricia. But she is the author and the co-author editor of 40 nonfiction and fiction books, which have been translated into multiple languages. Her fiction has received many awards, including a recent first place Firebird Book Award in Romance for Celestial Bodies, the Tess Lee and Jack Miller novels. And if you haven't read them, I would recommend picking them up. You can now get them all in like one volume. And an American Fiction Award for Inspirational Fiction, a Living Now Book Award for Adventure Fiction, and a National Indie Excellence Award for the novel Spark. Patricia has served as the creator and editor of 10 book series and as co-founder of the journal Art Research International. For her work in the field of research methods, she has received honors including the Distinguished Service Outside the Profession Award from the National Art Education Association, the New England Sociologist of the Year Award from the New England Sociological Association, the Special Achievement Award from the American Creativity Association, the Significant Contribution to Educational Measurement and Research Methodology Award from the Division D of the American Educational Research Association, the Outstanding Achievement in Arts and Learning Award from the Arts and Learning Special Interest Group of the AERA, A-E-R-A, and the Special Career Award from the International Congress of Qualitative Inquiry. And so that's just like a snippet, right, of these awards. So I am delighted that we get to talk about Reinvention, which is, kind of highlights then these methods of social fiction, right, for the rest of us. And so I just want to begin with, for those who haven't read it yet, can you tell us about Reinvention, the methods of social fiction, and why you wrote it?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the introduction. I don't know if other people feel this way, but y'all feel embarrassed when people read a bio about you. So anyway, that was really embarrassing. Thank you. So this book was actually, it's something I've wanted to write for years and years and years. And I just sort of never found the time because I was always writing fiction or writing other books. And I just didn't really have time to go back and document what I had done and what other people were doing. And the pandemic provided that opportunity. And so this was a lockdown project for me. I decided that I was going to spend, since I was stuck in my house, I was going to spend the lockdown working on projects that I always wanted to work on, that I wanted to share with others, or that would feed my soul somehow. And it's the fastest nonfiction book I ever wrote because I wasn't leaving the house at all. And I also really loved writing it. But really, it's just an introduction to fiction as a research method in the simplest terms. It's an overview of how researchers and qualitative researchers in particular can turn to fiction as a research method. What I call social fiction, but you don't need to use that term. I use that term because I sort of want to house all the work that different scholars are doing across the disciplines. Where scholars are taking their research, their scholarship, their theories, the paradigms they're working from, whatever it is, and they're transforming that into fiction. And I felt like we needed a term to sort of house all that work. So in 2010, I came up with the term social fiction, and that's really what this book is about. So there are chapters about sort of writing as inquiry and the history of writing as inquiry and how we do that and the different ways that might look. There's historical context because, researchers have been doing this for more than 100 years. There are philosophical novels and historical novels, and, this isn't new. It's maybe I'm trying to look at it a little bit differently, but it's not new. So there's historical context. And then there's a lot of methodological instruction, which is actually pretty tough to write, because the reality is that the writing process is different for everybody, and writing fiction is different for everybody. But there are different features of a fictional work that you probably will need to incorporate into your fiction. There are different structures for writing fiction, those kinds of things. So I do provide a lot of sort of methodological instruction in the book for anybody who's interested in any kind of creative writing with their research. And then there are chapters on the different forms of narrative, basically. So a 3-act structure, open structure, alternative structure, short story form, and so forth. And for each of those chapters, I provide information about that narrative structure, what it looks like, how it works. And then I provide an excerpt from one of my published works of fiction that's meant to illustrate what that looks like. And then I provide an original reflection on what I was trying to do when I was writing that, and how it aligns with that narrative form, or in some cases doesn't always perfectly align, and live and learn. And there's also evaluation criteria, because I know that's something that graduate students in particular, and early career researchers who want to do this work, are always worried about. How are people going to evaluate it? So again, while I always see evaluation criteria as sort of a little bit messy and problematic, I did want to provide that so that you can arm yourself with that if you have to go to a committee or anything else and say there are criteria. And I also offered publishing advice, because it's a very different world, publishing fiction, than it is academic nonfiction. And there are multiple avenues to it. And as Sandra was very kind enough to share that bio, I have pursued all those avenues for publishing fiction. I mean, I've published fiction with academic publishers, with hybrid publishers, with commercial trade publishers. I have republished my own work. So I've sort of done all of that, and I've just learned a lot about the different opportunities and the processes and tips. So that's sort of what the book's about. It's this overview, and I wrote it because I really wrote it for 2 reasons. I mean, again, I was in the lockdown, and just, this is a narrative inquiry and autoethnography conference. So in the spirit of disclosure, I was, really depressed, sitting in my house in sweatpants for over a year. And I was very grateful that I did have writing to turn to and creativity to turn to, because I actually think it made my life a lot easier than a lot of people I know. I did have something I enjoyed doing every day, but it was also difficult and depressing. And so I really wanted to work on passion projects, things that would get me up in the morning, things that would keep me going. And I have always wanted to write this book. I mean, I truly, my entire career, even before I coined the term social fiction, I was already writing this way for more than a decade. And I already wanted to write the book. It just wouldn't have had a name back then. So I'd always wanted to write it. But one, I always felt like I needed to do more in fiction before I felt comfortable writing it. So by the time I wrote this, I had published like a dozen novels and a collection of short stories, and I felt comfortable. And I also wrote it because I constantly get emails and direct messages on social media from researchers, grad students, asking, like, how do I do this? How do I get my committee on board with this? How do I get tenure if I do this? How do I publish it? I mean, I get more questions about these kinds of things than about anything else. And I really just wanted to help. Like, I wanted to give people something that, one, is a resource that can actually help you write this work and get it published, but also give you a resource that you can meet those benchmarks in academia that you might have to meet. Like, how can you do this as a graduate student? How can you do this and still get tenure? So I did it for myself to sort of document this work, and I did it in the hopes that it would be useful to others.
And we're grateful, because I was one of those people that said you need to write this book. Can you tell us something about the title? So why did you title it Reinvention? I
titled it Reinvention because for 12 years, people have been saying that I invented social fiction, and I think that's very lovely, but I don't agree with it. So coining a term and creating a practice are not the same thing. I feel like I am working, and we are all working in a long trajectory of folks who have been doing this work. And I can just give you famous examples that make it obvious, but Simone de Beauvoir, Jean-Paul Sartre, W.E.B. Du Bois, Zora Neale Hurston, they all wrote plays, novels, short story collections. W.E.B. Du Bois, by the way, wrote a romance novel, which is a romance novelist. I find that fabulous. But Jean-Paul Sartre was awarded the Nobel Prize for writing up his philosophical ideas in literary forms. Okay, he literally won the Nobel Prize for that, although he actually declined to accept it, but that's an aside. So my point is that this work has been going on for a long time. So I don't see it as a new invention. I see it as a reinvention. And my hope is that that will be empowering to people who want to do this work, but maybe are afraid to do it because you don't know how it will be accepted. There's actually a long history of it, some of which I do outline in the book, just in the hopes that it will be helpful. So that's why I called it reinvention.
Terrific. And so the book is chock full of helpful tips, and it's got pedagogical features, which I think everyone will like here. And you have skill building exercises and rethink your research exercises. And I'd like you to explain some of the difference between those two features.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, this might have come from you. I'm not sure. Sandra was one of the early reviewers for the book, which I found out subsequently. So when we first submitted the book to anonymous reviewers for feedback, a draft of it, I did have pedagogical features in it, but they thought there should be more, basically. I had them end of the book. They thought they should be end of the chapter. And I'm the kind of person where if someone gives me a good idea, and I thought that was a great idea the reviewers had, that if someone gives me a good idea, I will try and make the most out of it and really run with it. So instead of just creating one kind of activity for the end of chapters, I created two. And they're similar, but you would probably only do one set of them, which I'll explain. So first, at the end of every chapter, there's something called a skill building exercise. And I basically think of this as for students, but you can be a researcher student. I mean, anybody who just hasn't done this yet, doesn't have a research project, you're just learning about this the same way you might learn about autoethnography or qualitative interview or any other method. So they're just exercises meant to get you going. The second set is called Rethink Your Research. That is for anyone who is already engaged in a research project to help you reimagine it as fiction. So, because people say to me all the time, like, oh, I'm doing research on A, B, and C, I'm doing research on X, Y, and Z. I don't know how I would turn that into a creative writing project. So this book tells you exactly how to do that. So every chapter also has a Rethink Your Research, which tells you, take your research, whatever it is, doesn't matter the method, doesn't matter the discipline. I've spent a lot of time creating these exercises that they would work for hopefully anybody, whatever kind of research you're doing, and it gives you a way to rethink it and to reimagine it as fiction. And what I actually like the most about the exercises is if you complete the exercises at the end of every chapter, either set, depending on just where you are in your research experience, either set, you will create an entire work of fiction. And it will not be stressful. It will not be staring at a blank computer screen. It will not feel overwhelming because it's so bit by bit interspersed over the, I think, 9 chapters, however many chapters there are. So those are the two sets of exercises. And there are other tips and like pedagogical features throughout. For example, I have like tip bubbles throughout the chapters where I'm talking about something, like maybe I'm talking about how you write dialogue, or I'm explaining how you write interiority, what a character is thinking, their internal monologue. And then I'll have a tip bubble, which is basically like, hey, this is another thing you can do, or like, hey, this is another word for that you might see, or these kinds of tips just to get you thinking in different ways. And they're things basically that I've learned over writing fiction for oh, I mean, I've been writing fiction my whole life, but I've been publishing it since the late 90s. So people think I started later than that, but I didn't. I actually started when I was in graduate school. But they're just mostly like short pieces and that sort of thing. So anyway, so I have all of those exercises and tips in there, really meant to guide readers through the entire process and hopefully empower you that you feel like when you're done with this book, you can actually do this. Because one of my pet peeves when I read any kind of instructional book, it can be an awesome book and I can feel like I'm taking notes and I'm highlighting so much, but I get to the end of the book and then I just have like a pile of notes and I still sort of am nowhere. Like you don't know where to start, you don't know what to do. And so in this book, I wanted to take that experience and try and transform it for the reader, that chapter by chapter, you're actually doing something. And by the end of the book, without even thinking about it, you can have an entire work of fiction if you choose to.
You also have included some excerpts from some of your work in here. And so how did you decide which excerpts to put in the book, and how does that process then help you reflect on your body of work?
So that was actually, I thought picking, I have like a dozen novels and I have a collection of short stories, and I only needed excerpts for something like 5 of the chapters, the ones that are in different narrative forms. So I thought, oh, this is going to be easy breezy, just to pick like excerpts from my fiction to use. And of course, it was the most laborious part of this entire book. I never really go back and reread my work because I read it so much before it's published. I mean, usually I've literally gone through hundreds of revisions. So I try and make peace with it. By the time I release it into the world, I feel like I have my relationship with it. Now, if other people choose to read it, they have theirs. So I don't like to go back a lot and read. And I ended up having to reread everything I've ever written. Which the big takeaway for me was, yeah, I like really love writing. Like I was kind of surprised by all the things I'd written. And it was challenging because I wanted to do 2 things. I mean, first of all, I wanted to make it as useful for readers as I could. So first of all, they have to be excerpts that are helpful to a reader, even if you haven't read the novel or short story, which I have no expectation that people would have read my fiction when they read this book. So they have to be things that could be understandable, even if you haven't read the book. So that's one challenge. The second challenge is sort of a vanity thing, but just in the interest of disclosure, like everybody wants to put their best foot forward. So I wanted to choose excerpts I think are strong, that I like. I wanted to choose some of my favorites, but those weren't always the most helpful for teaching. So I had to balance that reality. And then, I'm going to actually turn to the book, see if I can find an example. Okay, so the chapters on narrative structures, they each open and it says techniques highlighted in this chapter. So this is the traditional 3-act structure chapter, and the techniques highlighted are dialogue, internal dialogue, interiority, and third-person narration. So in that chapter, in addition to learning what a 3-act structure is and how to do it, you will learn about those specific techniques. So therefore, the excerpt used in that chapter has to exemplify those specific techniques. So it was a balancing act, right? I had to choose things that readers could understand without ever having read the book. I had to choose things that would line up with specific techniques. And then I had to balance my own desire to, this book chronicles my body of work more than anything I've ever done, and probably more than anything I ever will do. I mean, it chronicles my entire contribution, I think, to the field of knowledge and research methodology and social fiction, and it chronicles my entire body of fiction. So I also had to balance like what are going to be the examples. And it was tough. Like one of my favorite novels I've written, I did not include an excerpt because I just didn't think the teaching value was there. So I just let it go. My least favorite novel I've written, I did include excerpts because I felt like they would actually be really helpful. Also in part because I didn't know what I was doing when I wrote that book, which I talk about in the reflection. And I thought that could be useful and encouraging to folks who might be newer to this practice and nervous about it. And I also did disclose, like in one case, I chose an example because it's literally my favorite thing I've ever written. I was like, so clearly I'm going to include it. So it was a really interesting process. And the great takeaway for me, though, is that, I mean, my writing's changed a lot, like everybody's has. So you get better, you change styles, you try new things, you try things that work really well, you try things that you think fail miserably, regardless of what anyone else thinks. And it was actually fun to see that whole process and know that I'm still in that process because it's lifelong. But it was also great to look back and see some of the substantive things that I talked about in my books, because I'm proud of that. I mean, my novels are, you know, they're meant to be fun beach reads, but they also deal with sexual assault, Me Too, suicide, serious, important topics, things that are important to me and important to other people. And so I felt good about looking at that as a body of work. And I share that only so that others can think about their body of work. Like, what are you contributing? How are we using our voices? And I don't always have the time to look back and reflect, and this provided that. And it really made me think about, how have I used my voice? How do I want to use it moving forward? And so I think that that's a valuable tool.
And so you talked about like your favorite book and your least favorite book. So if someone hasn't read any of your fiction books, where would you suggest they begin?
So I know exactly where I would suggest. I actually have a brand new book, and Sandra, you have read it because you were one of the early readers. But I haven't shared anything about this book publicly. I'm probably going to do it at the end of this week, but I guess I'm going to do it here instead. So I have a new book. It is called Hollyland. This is actually an advanced reader copy. I don't even have the real copies yet. It's called Hollyland. And I will tell you a little bit what it's about and why it would be the book that I would suggest. Okay, so I guess I'll just read the back cover blurb, but then I'll tell you what I think it's actually about and why I wrote it, or why I suggest it. Okay, so what happens when a seemingly ordinary woman with a passion for the arts falls in love with a Hollywood star known for his bachelor status and quick temper with the paparazzi? Something extraordinary. Dee Schwartz is a writer and arts researcher. Ryder Field is a famous actor descended from Hollywood royalty. On the night they meet outside a bar, their connection is palpable. Ryder's mother, legendary actress Rebecca Field, half of Hollywood's golden couple when she died, was kidnapped and murdered by a crazed fan in a shocking event that forever tarnished Tinseltown. Dee's mother too died when she was young. Bonded by this loss, the two embark on a love story that explores their search for magic or gold dust in their lives. Everything changes, however, when Dee mysteriously disappears after an award ceremony. Is history repeating itself? Can there truly be a happily ever after in Hollywood? So what the book is really about, it's a celebration of the arts. Everything I have ever studied, thought about, wondered about, known about the arts is in this novel. And some people who read it might not see that, but you all will see that if you choose to read it. It's a celebration of the arts, and it's also a celebration of living life with passion and appreciating what we have and thinking about who are the real movie stars on the big screen of our lives. Because they're probably not celebrities, but they're the people that matter the most to us. And I share this book partly in this conference because it's the most autoethnographic thing probably I've ever written. And it's funny because nobody out there outside of our community will ever see that. They will think it's the least autobiographical, but it is the most autoethnographic thing I've ever written. So I'll just preface this with, it is fiction. I am not the main character. None of the people in the book really are real people. However, the main character, Dee, has more of me than any character I've ever written. She is literally an arts researcher. That is what she does in the world. I wrote this book during the lockdown because my elderly father, with whom I am very close, got COVID. This was in 2020, well, long before the vaccine. He got COVID and he had cancer at that time. And we thought 100% he's going to die. It was a really bad, serious case of COVID. He had an enlarged heart and pneumonia and blood clots. And like I said, he had cancer and he's elderly and not in great health to begin with. So I absolutely thought I was never going to see him again. And I live in Maine and my folks live in Florida, and there was no way to get there because of the lockdown. And we were told even if we did get there, I wouldn't be allowed to see him. So basically, I was just never going to see my father again, was my fear. And he and my daughter are my two #1 people in the world forever. So I wanted to write him a letter, everything he means to me, like that love letter you write when you think someone's going to die. But I guess a letter wasn't enough. And so I ended up staying up day and night and I wrote him this novel. And I literally stayed up around the clock writing this. I rushed it to my copy editor, asked her to do me a favor so he wouldn't read a crappy version with typos. And this book is absolutely, it is a love letter to him, and it is a love letter to living life with passion. And the main character, Dee, is very close with her father in the book, and he is absolutely based on my father. My dad's family history is woven into the book. Family names, all the kinds of things that nobody will ever see but him. And it's this like real celebration of life. So I love this book, but it contains a narrative about doing creative research and being creative, which is another reason that I was suggested if somebody was interested in reading my work. And it's not out yet, but you can actually pre-order it now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere if you're interested, which I would totally appreciate the support. If you're interested, Hollyland is like available everywhere. But I do want to just read you 2 quick excerpts because I think they relate to our conference. I hope the first one doesn't offend you. I hope it makes you laugh. It's about academia because I did share some of my feelings in this book. So Dee, the main character, is talking to her new lover, and she's telling him about a friend of hers who is a professor. And she studies film. Her professor friend is a film studies professor, but she doesn't much care for actors. And so Dee is trying to explain this. So she says, I don't want to give you a bad impression of Sarah. She's super smart and a loyal friend. You'd like her, I think. You just have to consider where she's coming from. Academia is a snake pit, kind of like our government. Rye laughed. Oh, you laugh, but trust me, I know. Aside from Hollywood or Washington, D.C., there's nothing more hierarchical and elitist than academia. It's kind of like high school, but with funding wars. A few people are elevated to the popular crew, a couple of whom are anointed prom king and queen, and everyone else has to pretend to be happy for them while they work their behinds off for no recognition, substandard treatment, and little pay. Sarah's always been a worker bee. She sees parallels between Hollywood and academia, that's all. Makes her suspicious of anyone who's made it. So you can see I've incorporated some of my thoughts into this character and into this book. And I do think it has relevance for people who are navigating the academic world. And there's one other short excerpt I'll read. It's one of my favorite parts of the book. It actually, Sandra was very kind to share that very embarrassing bio earlier. But that 2022 ARA Arts and Learning Award that I can't believe I received, but I did, and I accepted it via Zoom because of the pandemic. I was asked to make some sort of like speech or talk or whatever, but I'm not really actually a speech or talk kind of gal, but I am a novelist. So I told them I would read an excerpt from my unpublished novel because I thought it was the best way to express how I felt about receiving that Arts and Learning Award. So this is what I read to them months ago, which I will now read to you. So Dee, the main character, is an arts researcher, and she's out to dinner with her lover, who's a famous Hollywood actor, and they're with a bunch of other famous celebrities. And one of them is a director, a film director, and he knows about her work in arts research, and he's asking her about her work. So he says, what inspired you to study the arts in the unique way you have? What do you want next? I love the arts, have since I was a little girl. Sitting in a movie theater, going to a concert, reading a novel, it all just seemed magical. Who wouldn't benefit from more magic in their lives? Bry put his arm around her and she nuzzled closer to him. At some point, I realized that for all the arts bring to our lives, they aren't valued. Our education system is proof of that. I had the foolish idea that if I could explain the science of art, explore how people experience art and learn from it, that maybe we'd start to value it more. She stopped and sighed, but truthfully, it's all bullshit. Oliver looked stunned. Why do you say that? Don't misunderstand me. Everything I've researched and written is true. It's just that it shouldn't matter. We should value art for art's sake, but sometimes people can't see what's right in front of them, so you have to give them a way to see it. Oliver smirked and said, you're like the Wizard of Oz, the woman behind the curtain, showing everyone the gold dust they already possess, their power. She smiled. Funny, my friend Seymour has always called me his Dorothy. Perhaps the yellow brick road was really just a trail of gold dust connecting one dream to another. So anyway, thank you for asking what book I'd recommend. This is a little preview of my new book, Hollyland, which I would be very excited if any of you choose to read.
No, you all should definitely pick it up. Actually, just about anything that you write, Patricia. And I just want to tell a little story. So I had COVID at the end of the year, and so I couldn't really, do much, but it was really nice to have a novelist friend, because then I was complaining to Patricia and she's like, well, here's this novel. So it was really terrific to be able to just have a novel delivered to my inbox. So
it's awesome to have friends that are willing to read your stuff, that you don't have to beg. They're just like, oh yeah, I'll read it. I'm like, oh, you're awesome, thank you.
So that is a benefit, but I would definitely say to pick it up. And so you can tell through Reinvention and through how you've been talking that you're in love with writing. I mean, it's what you do. And then even though at times it's difficult. So what's your favorite part of writing fiction?
Writing is really difficult. So I'm glad you said that, because I think people think that because I love it and I'm pretty prolific at it, that it must be easy, and it is not easy. So I have some days that are awesome and it's just flowing and it's great. And I have so many days where I just sit there pulling my hair out, begging the universe for a word, just trying to string together a paragraph by the end of the day. And I go through that discipline because it gets you the good times, and I understand that. But it's not always easy, but I am completely in love with writing. And I guess I would say, there's something about like crawling into a story world, which if you're a reader, you know that. If you're a fan of going to movies, you know that, about escaping into a story world, and that becomes your world for that like immersive experience for that time you're experiencing or consuming the art. And that's how it is when you're writing. When you're writing fiction, it's like you are living in this story world, and it's an incredible thing to be able to leave your own world and crawl into another one. I mean, I feel that way every day when I walk into my office, that like right now I'm in my life. And as soon as I'm off the Zoom, I'm going to get back to my novel and I will be in a totally different world. And that is just awesome. So I love that. My favorite part of writing is that it's a process of discovery, which is actually why I think it's so similar to research, including very traditional research, because it is a process of discovery. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know in research, you don't know in fiction. And people always argue about this with me, but usually I'm open to other people's opinions. But in this case, I think they're wrong. I think that you don't know what's going to happen. You just don't. And if you do, then you're making it happen. And then it's like a self-fulfilling thing, because the reality is we shouldn't be doing research if we know exactly what's going to happen. It's meant to create new insights, new learning. And the same is true for fiction. And even when I have a clear outline for a novel, even when I can see the whole thing like a movie in my mind, and I know from beginning to end what happens, there are always surprises writing it, because having an idea and being able to translate it are not the same thing. So I might have a fully baked idea for a novel, but no idea how I'm going to translate it. And I have to figure that out and experiment and try things that don't work and throw chapters of it away, and all that kind of stuff. And it's a process of discovery. And I will tell you, everything I've ever written, certainly in fiction, my favorite moments and the moments that readers comment on the most and that I think are the best moments, none of them were planned. None of them. They all came because of those days where I sit my butt in the chair when it's hard and plug away when it's hard and miserable, and I know I'm going to have to revise every word, it leads you to these magical moments where it's just flowing and you can't believe a character said something, you didn't know they were going to say it, and it allows the next character to say something that's so lyrical or profound or insightful or whatever it is, and you had no idea that was going to happen. And that is why I love writing, because it is a process of discovery. And if you are open to it and surrender to it by having discipline, these incredible magical moments come. And it's one of the reasons that writing Reinvention was a challenge, because I did give a lot of methodological instruction because I want to be helpful. But on the flip side, I also acknowledge in the book, like, writing happens differently every time. I mean, I've written a dozen novels that are done, and I'm writing more as we speak. And I can tell you the process has been different every time. And that's why I'm still so in love with writing, because it's never the same.
There's also an emotional side of writing autoethnographic fiction or social fiction. And so do you have any advice for those of us that are new to it?
Absolutely. It's a great, great question. And this is another thing where it's different for everybody, right? I mean, I don't know what each person's emotional experience is going to be doing this kind of work. I don't even know what mine will be for each of my projects. So it is different for everybody, but I can say a couple of things. I mean, there's the writing it, and then there's the releasing it, sharing it. So the process of writing fiction, for me, I feel everything my characters feel, everything. It's the only way I'm able to write. So I truly, like, I take in, so if they are suffering, I feel that suffering. And sometimes it is experiences I've had, sometimes it's experience I haven't had, but I absolutely feel it. I mean, I had one chapter in one of my books. It took me days to write because I was bawling at the computer the whole time. And it's absolutely an experience I have never had and that I never will have. But it was so emotional for this character I love so much. And it's an experience a lot of other people have had. And so I wanted to get it right. And so I feel what they feel, and that itself takes a toll. Then when it is personal to you, there's that additional layer, which again, it can also be very cathartic. And I do find writing very cathartic. And I find that when I write about my own experiences, even if they're totally fictionalized, so even if they're very different, I do find that it can be a very cathartic experience. But then there's the process of sharing it. And I just have to say, like, you need to be brave to share your fiction. I really, really believe that. Rita Irwin, one of my favorite scholars, she emailed me. I never met her. She emailed me when my first novel came out, like, I don't know, like 11, 12 years ago. And I didn't know her. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe Rita Irwin's emailing me. And she told me she thought I was very brave to publish that novel. And at the time, I like kind of poo-pooed it, not her lovely note, but just this idea that it was brave. I mean, I didn't see it that way at all. But that just shows you how naive I was, because the reality is that, you know, when you write fiction, it is very personal to you, whether it's autobiographical or not. You just it's art. So you are just close to your art. You love your characters. I love some characters that people see as villains. And it's like, I know their backstory. Like, I know their mother. I love them. Like, I have compassion for them. I can't write any character I don't have compassion for. I have compassion for all of them, or I couldn't write them. So you write fiction, and it's not like writing a journal article where comes out a year or two after you've written it. Maybe nobody ever reads it. If people do read it, you don't necessarily hear from them. And if you do, it's like a citation or something very sterile later on. This is different. You put fiction out and readers have an emotional, immediate response, which is often they love it or they hate it. That's just the nature of how people subjectively respond to art. And the people who choose to leave online reviews and those kinds of things are usually people who really love something or really hate something. So you have to be able to take that in. And it is really difficult. So, I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like, it is difficult for people to critique something that you work really hard on, you're proud of, you love, that's personal to you. It is difficult when people don't like characters that you feel compassion for, or characters that are based on you or people you know. It is difficult taking in that, and it is hurtful taking in that feedback. And so I caution people to, I don't want to discourage anyone at all. I just want to make you aware so you're sensitized to it, so you can prepare yourself, that you feel ready to do that. The way that I feel ready to do it, for what it's worth, is when I release something into the world, I make peace with it. I really do. I feel as good about it as I can. I know why I wrote it. I know my intention behind it. I know the process it went through of getting feedback and all of that stuff. And I know what it means to me in my relationship to it. And then I make peace with it, and I try not to get too involved in other people's relationship with it, good or bad, because it, positive feedback after something is out can actually be damaging to creative artists as well, and to creative researchers, because first of all, you can't change the way you write to please people or because they like it, or you can't go off on an agenda that's not authentic because that's what people respond to. You need to follow your own vision. And also, if you believe all the good things, then you're forced to believe all the bad things, right? That's just reality. So it's much better, I think, to try and have your own relationship with your work to the best of your ability, and then let other people have their own relationship, positive, negative, mixed, whatever it may be, that doesn't dictate how you feel about your work. Because otherwise you're always like blowing in the breeze of people's opinions and feelings in a way that's not helpful. It's really helpful to get a lot of feedback, and I talk about loops of feedback in the book. Really helpful to get feedback while you're drafting, while you're revising, before something's published. But once it's out there, have your own relationship with it that is not dependent on anything external, how many people read it, how they feel about it, what they say about it, because that will allow you to write the next thing. That will allow you to keep going. And I also think that the relationship we have with our characters and the story worlds we create is very sacred and special. Nobody will ever be in our heads. Nobody will ever know. Like, I mean, you can go read this book, but you'll never know all the life experiences that informed it. You'll never know, when you're reading what Dee, the arts researcher, what she says. You'll never know which of those things she says I believe and which I'm throwing out there as food for thought. But I know. And so it's better for me to have my own relationship with the book and let others have theirs. And I do also suggest, while you're drafting things, to have like a treasured writing buddy or writing circle of truly people you trust. And I have that. I have a writing buddy that I meet with once a week, and she edits my work and I edit hers. And I'm also in our writing group of treasured people. And I also have close friends. Sandra Faulkner is one of those friends who reads my novels in advance, and I have others, including in this group, that I've sent my books to in advance. And when I say people you trust, it doesn't mean they're going to be like, I loved it and that's it. Like, feedback is actually important and helpful. You want feedback, but that their only agenda is to help you meet your vision. They don't have their own vision. They don't have their own agenda. They don't like to hear themselves talk. They don't like to be the critic. If you can find people like that, it will help you make peace of your project by the time you publish it, because you will know that you feel good about it, that it was vetted by people you trust, and that going through that process helps you make peace with it.
That's great advice. Thank you. And I've got one last question. So thinking about graduate students or early career researchers who want to publish social fiction, do you have any advice for them if they're worried about having this accepted in the academy?
Yes, and I'm very, very glad you asked that. First of all, the advice is do it, do it, do it, do it. But I will go back I'll walk that back a little to give you some practical advice. Look, I completely get it. So I just want to say, I started doing this work when I was in graduate school. I was I want to give you a bit of my history so you know that I do understand pragmatic concerns, okay? Because people look at me through the lens of 40 books or whatever you said, but that's not where it started. And so I do understand pragmatic concerns. When I was in graduate school, I started doing this work. I called it experimental writing back then. And I was a single mother in graduate school in my 20s. I desperately needed a tenure track job, and I desperately needed tenure at that job. And I mean, needed it. So I understand the practical concerns of needing to be marketable on the job market, needing to be able to advance and get promotion. But I found ways to do this work during that time and not wait until like you're a full professor. And I want to encourage everyone else, wherever you are in your career, if you're an undergrad student or you're a full professor, it doesn't matter. If this is the work you want to do, start doing it now, because life is short, truly. Okay, life is short and we need to make the most of it and doing work that is meaningful. And I'm a firm believer, if you do work that is meaningful to you, it has a chance of being meaningful to others. If you're doing work that is not meaningful to you, it will be useless to others. Yes, it will be a line on your CV, but so what? At the end of your life, is that really what you want, the lines in your CV? I think most people would say no. Yes, you want to advance in your career, but you want more than that. Nobody went into academia to be rich and famous. So if you wanted a route to like major success in that level, you would have picked something else. So you went into this because there's something you care about and you're interested in, that you want to contribute to this world. So if you want to do this work, do it, because life is short. I can tell you that I have published over the years traditional, non-traditional, creative things. All the things that have actually been the most successful, sold the most copies, got the most awards, however you want to look at that sort of superficial success, all those things were my passion projects I actually cared about. The things that I wrote because I thought a lot of people would write them, no, that didn't work out. And I totally know why. Like looking back, I know why. Because when you are doing something authentic that you are passionate about, that connects to you emotionally, it has the potential to do that for others. So if you really care about your research topic, your agenda, the things that you're studying, find a way to express that will resonate with people. And it might not be fiction. It is fiction for me. It might be a different form of creative writing. It might be a different artistic form. There are lots of different ways that are creative you might express yourself. And just in terms of like pragmatic things, how can you do this? There are a few different strategies depending on where you are and how open people are to this kind of work. First of all, use the citation system. I'm not a believer in the citation system at all. I think it makes academic writing like horrible, but it can be helpful in this case. So use it to your advantage. There are a lot of people who have done creative work for more than 100 years. A lot of famous people, successful people who have done this work. I try and list as many of them as I can in Reinvention just to like give people a starting point, but there are others. So cite, 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 so that you can show. The whole point of doing research and getting credit as legitimate research is that you can show that you are contributing to a body of knowledge in academia. You can do that by taking whatever your topic is and writing social fiction or some other sort of creative output. So cite, cite, cite to show that you are in fact in conversation with others who are using this methodology and have used this methodology for a long time. Another thing you can do is you can write creative pieces and then you can write more traditional academic pieces about them. And this is something I've always done, mostly because I want to speak to more than one audience. So you might write a short story, but you might also write a journal article about it or an op-ed about it if the audience you want to speak to is not just academic, but a public audience. The point is there might be multiple outcomes. You might write, maybe you don't want to write a journal article about an empirical study. Maybe that doesn't jive what you're doing, but you could write about the methodology of your creative writing and submit it to a methodology journal. You could write about the teaching implications, submit it to a pedagogy journal. There are different strategies where you can take your one piece of work and make it have more than one outcome, one that's more intended outside of the academy, one that's more intended inside the academy. And I've always done that. And it's a way of making the most of your work. Another thing is to find your people, which I mean, part of why I'm here at this conference is because you're all my people, and the folks at ICQI and the arts folks at ARA. And there are others as well, but find your people. So don't just go to the major professional conference in your discipline if your people aren't there. Use your travel money and time to go to a place where you can build a community and network of scholars. I mean, I'm a sociologist. My bachelor, master's, and PhD are all in sociology. And I think I've been to ASA like twice in the last 20 years. And I think the last time I was there is because I was getting an award or something, and they were like, you have to come, which I totally didn't. So I won't be doing that again. The reason I don't go is because they're not my people. I love sociologists, but the way that conference is structured, the kind of work that is valued, this is not where I want to put my energy. So I go to ARA, which is an education conference, even though I'm not an education researcher, because more of my people are there. So find the right professional communities, not the ones you think on paper are the right ones, but the ones that feel right, where you meet the right people. Join social media groups where you can communicate with people all over the world who are interested in what you're doing. And reach out to scholars who might be able to serve on your committees for your thesis, your dissertation, your tenure or promotion review. I get emails like this all the time, sometimes from people saying like, you know, I'm sure you're going to say no to this. I actually say yes as much as I'm able to. I can't say yes to everybody. And when I have to say no because of time, I try and suggest other people if they might ask. But I say yes a lot. And more importantly, other people do. A lot of people's inclination is to help colleagues and students doing this kind of work. We understand the constraints. We understand what this larger academic world is like. So we want to help each other. So reach out to people doing this work and, you know, and ask to like be in their network. And I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much. And I think we're actually out of time, and I know that you've got to run to another session. So I just want to thank you for all of the advice and the conversation, and just encourage anyone who hasn't picked up, write a copy of Reinvention to pick one up.
Oh, I'm reading the comments now. I need my glasses to read them.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your comments. Sandra, thank you so much for hosting this. I do have another session that starts at 3, which I'm chairing, but if there are any like very quick questions or anything, like absolutely speak up or write them quickly in the chat. Or if there's something you want to follow up on, you can always message me on Facebook. I respond to every message I get. And I see some of my Facebook friends here. I'm so happy to see you.
Hi, Patricia. Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking about you this morning. I'm going to be like messaging you on Facebook in a week.
Okay.
I have a favor.
Okay, great. I just have a quick question. I know it's probably requires a longer answer, but how did you make the step from academia to the independent scholar? Do you want to just give us a hint?
Yeah, I totally. And I'm happy to talk more when there's more time. I knew that ultimately I wanted to be independent. So like, I just always knew that. I didn't know if I'd be able to do it, but I knew I wanted to do it. So years before I left my tenured job, I started taking steps to be able to do it. So that it felt like I had built something before I did it. So for example, I started taking on more publishing contracts with book publishers. And I started negotiating better contracts, which that's a whole different topic, but I started getting paid like authors should be paid. So that a lot of authors are just so happy after years of rejection, they'll take any old contract. I stopped doing that. I took on actually more book projects than I had the time to do. And I just figured day or night, I'll figure out a way to do this, to take advantage of it, to make the most of these opportunities so that I can make the leap someday. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to make the leap. So I made some personal sacrifices and worked sort of round the clock. I also, I published textbooks. And at that time, the ones I was publishing, they were not like my dream of what I wanted to write, but I understood that if a textbook is successful, that one, you make money from it, which if I'm going to quit my job, I need to make money. But I also understand too, it gets your name out there, which I could use to build a platform for what I really want to do. So I tried to be strategic about it. I also started editing book series because I was afraid that if I can't write enough, fast enough, publish enough, fast enough, how am I going to earn a living? But if I was an editor of book series, then I would be earning royalties on other people's books too. So I wouldn't just have to rely on my own income. So by the time I quit my tenured job, I don't know how many books I had published at that point, but probably like 10 or 12. And I was making a living from them, like what could be a living without benefits, without healthcare, without any of that, but I was making what could be a living from that. And at that point, I had several book series I was editing, which ultimately became 10 book series. So I made these strategic choices, and I did stuff for years, including some stuff I didn't want to do, in order to be able to make that leap. And I will also disclose that I did have a partner whose health insurance I could go on, which I share because that's a real practical concern. And years earlier, when I didn't have that, I would not have been able to make that leap. Even earning what I was earning from my books, I have a child, and there's no way I would have left my job with full benefits if I didn't have a partner who had those benefits. So that's just a practical thing, and that was my particular situation, but that's how I made the leap, and thank you for asking. And good luck to anyone who wants to do it. It is possible.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sandra, thank you so much for hosting this.